Grüezi Amerika, Views from the Sister Republic, a University of St.Gallen podcast by Claudia Brühwiler. Grüezi miteinander. Welcome to the very first episode of Views from the Sister Republic. Today's episode is a conversation about the risks of the second Trump presidency. And I'm joined by one of my favorite people to talk to, Christoph Frei. We will talk in English for this episode, but you'd normally hear us talk in the very same dialect, the immensely popular dialect of our native Thurgau. Christoph is an associate professor of political science at the University of St. Gallen, and he is, among many other things, the author of an influential intellectual biography of Hans Morgenthau. While working on his book, he spent several years in the United States of America, and during that time, and of course later throughout his studies and his research, he has come to understand American political culture probably as well as his other passion research subject, France. Christoph, to begin with, was your research stay at the University of Virginia your first US experience, or had you been to the United States before being a doctoral student?
Good morning, and thank you for having me. It was the first time. It was a very real first, and it was an eye-opener in so many ways, because coming there, all I brought along was I was full of prejudice and stereotypical kind of ideas. And then coming to Charlottesville was good, again, in many, many various ways. I think the most lovely memory that I still have is just the reception that I was given, this PhD student coming in from Switzerland, and I was just received in a very humane manner, and I will never forget that.
What is your favorite anecdote that you would call a very typical American experience? Aside from the reception, which I think is also very typical of America, particularly the typical of the South.
The hospitality, yes. Episode and anecdote. One of the fondest memories that I have of that time is on day 3 or day 4 in Charlottesville, my landlord, Manger Ramsey, he took me to a football game of the famous Virginia Cavaliers. Don't laugh, Claudia. And what it was not so much the game; it was the tailgating party. Prior to the game. Tailgating doesn't refer to some cyber attack here. Tailgating refers to the way people spend time by their cars, eating out of the trunk, so to speak, doing barbecues, chatting to each other, talking to each other, socializing in the very best of ways. And I think that was my introduction to a broader and, for me, typically American phenomenon, and that is the sheer pacific manner of doing sports. You don't have hooligans, you don't have violence, you don't have this almost fundamentalist kind of and prone to violence kind of being a fan. No, it was just a wonderful introduction to how American people celebrate and cultivate sports. And I will never forget that. The tailgating outside of the Cavaliers Stadium in Charlottesville. Unforgettable, really.
That's so funny that you mentioned that, because I spent 2008, the fall semester at Notre Dame, and Notre Dame is, of course, a football powerhouse. The Domers are just all out in support of the Fighting Irish. And I was struck by the very same thing. You'd hear from the stadium thousands of students chanting, "Kill, kill, kill," and "Lift the roof." And you'd think, my God, this intensity, what if they lose? But, well, if they lose, they just go out to dinner, have a nice chat with the fans from Michigan, even though, well, Michigan is the big enemy, etc. But it's all very peaceful. And during a tailgating, people will take an interest in the odd Swiss student who is serving them hot dogs and talk about their own experiences having visited Einsiedeln and so on. So I very much agree. It's a wonderful way to get introduced to American values and American mores that are so different, even though they put so much more value into sports, and at the same time they kind of balance it better out emotionally.
Absolutely. I agree. I mean, I contrast that to what fans do, in the whereabouts of where we are.
Yeah.
Contrast that with with the sheer fanatism and violence that you see in many of today's soccer stadiums in Europe. So it's a lovely contrast, and I think it's also a very telling contrast.
Although when we're talking about fanatism, you have provided me with the perfect segue to our actual topic, and that is the election and its aftermath. Because we heard here also a lot of voices that were afraid of violence, that were afraid of the kind of fanaticism that might be unleashed on either side in the aftermath of the election. So let's just start with the outcome. You have been following the election very closely. You've actually been following all elections this year very closely. You've really done a democracy marathon this year. And you've commented on several elections for different media outlets, also for the US election. So how surprised were you by Donald J. Trump's triumph?
Oh, well, hindsight is always 2020. And so I'm not going to tell you that I was not surprised at all. I do say, however, that yes, given the momentum that, as far as I'm concerned, had really it had drifted, or it had really changed sides, and given the numbers that we had in the prior to the election, it didn't really come as a big surprise. However, and this is a very important addendum here, it's not been a landslide. No matter how the Trump campaign portrays it now as a landslide, and I don't know how many observers keep telling us that it was so clear. No, it's not. We're close to 100% now of the count. And if you look at the numbers, it's been pretty close, pretty darn close, I should say. It's 48.4% for Kamala Harris and 49.95% for Donald Trump. That's not exactly what we call a landslide. And if you compare that with the Reagans and the Nixons and the Lyndon B. Johnsons, who would win by a 22 or 23% margin, oh my gosh, it's been pretty close. So all in all, the polls were not that wrong, right? Therefore, it's moot to say, oh, I was not surprised or I was surprised. It's been pretty close.
But still, many were speculating whether he might, win Electoral College, but not win a popular majority. And he won both. So I think that has surprised many. Also, the fact that he won all 7 swing states, that has been kind of surprising. And I think what surprised me personally was how quickly we saw the result come out, because that was both a fear, but also an expectation that we might be in limbo for several days.
And that's probably why all of us, did in at least, or many of us did, in the very early hours of the, November 6th probably, did speak of, it's been clear. all the seven swing states, and also the prospect of having both Senate and the House on his side. So depending on how you choose your criterion, it's been pretty clear in terms of how it's perceived. But again, the numbers are impartial and the numbers tell us a different story. And I therefore I find it difficult, or I find it problematic to talk about, why did they now all go to Donald Trump? Well, 50% basically did, and the other 48% didn't.
Of all the analysis that you read about the election outcome, which explanations for Donald Trump's victory did you find the most compelling? Or what do you perceive to be the reasons for his triumph?
And that precisely is the one answer that I'm going to, not deny, but I just find it very hard. Claudia, I can still not quite believe that it's been the economy, stupid. Everybody keeps, writing, it's been inflation. Yes, that has certainly played a role, but it cannot account for all of it. It just seems so, monocausal, and we should not ever engage or, commit to monocausal explanations. So it's been more than that. I think, in all fairness, Kamala Harris had 107 days. I mean, it's just this, I was amongst those who never thought it possible to begin with to switch candidates in the summer. And I was amongst those who would always say, or who just felt it was not knowledge. It was more like this hunch, so to speak. This is not going to be good for the Democrats, even though it looked good for a long time. But now that you ask me, why were they not successful? I'm at loss. I cannot give you anything that I find like super compelling. As far as I'm concerned, we shall never quite know. And it's certainly a number of reasons, such as, and then you start listing all those aspects that we've been reading about.
Well, I agree that it's definitely not monocausal. It's never just monocausal. But the economy, stupid, is quite compelling if we're looking at the exit polls and we look at the condition Americans have been living their lives in, economically speaking, because having traveled in the Midwest this summer, we also felt it as Swiss tourists coming from relatively well-off circumstances. We saw that the prices were way higher than we were used to in the United States. And given what we know about American spending habits, lack of saving habits, and just the way Americans relate to money and spending in general, we saw that this means trouble for many Americans. And also looking at the housing market, these were all matters that made people very discontent. And I absolutely agree with you. I was also in the camp who thought that it would be impossible to exchange candidates. I also thought that the switch was rather abrupt and not very respectful of Joe Biden as the incumbent president. And I also thought this was not the most compelling candidate that they switched to, although I completely understood the reasons why they opted for the vice president. Under the circumstances, she was the best pick. And overall, she did the best she could do with the time at her disposal. And now, of course, everything is under a magnifying glass that she did in terms of campaign decisions, etc., as is to be expected. But I do think the economic argument is very compelling, combined with an overall exhaustion of people with what went down during the past 4 years and a feeling that they had not been taken seriously in their woes, both when it comes to the economy and when it comes to migration and other culture war issues. So that's my take for the moment. But you're right, we have to wait for better data and a better foundation to explain all that went into people's minds when they made their decision for Donald Trump or against Kamala Harris.
But isn't it nice, Claudia, even when, insisting on the relevance of the economy and inflation. But even, in saying what you just did, you could not help bringing in migration. You could not help bringing in a few other issues.
Absolutely.
And so, if you put it that way, I'm in full agreement. One question back to you. You mentioned that they've not been very nice to and respectful to Joe Biden. But is it not also a fact, this is a question, that Joe Biden, initially was not about a second term? He was the one who, as far as I understand, had, told his friends in his own party that he was going to make way in the second that he was basically looking at one term, not two. So that is a question, Claudia. Is that a wrong information?
I mean, at the end of the day, we don't know what he really intended to do when he got elected the first time around, but he did portray himself as a transitional president. And the majority of people took this as, well, I'm serving here as a bridge builder between generations. I think he also phrased it in similar ways. But at the same time, he couldn't say, well, I'll definitely step down after one term, because then you make yourself a lame duck from the get-go. When Donald Trump decided to run again, I was pretty sure that Joe Biden will want to run again too. Because he had the most compelling political profile to beat someone like Donald Trump, and B, because I also think, and that might be a bit too much kitchen psychology there, but I do think that it is also a question of amour propre, that you want to beat the same guy again and not leave room for someone else. And then I read somewhere, but this is again something we can only know if Joe Biden confirmed this, that he intended one part of his legacy to be that he was the man who aided the first Black president to get elected, and that he would be the man who would make way for the first Black woman to be president, and that he thought best to do this if he got re-elected and then stepped down earlier. So yes, you're right. He read the room wrongly, and he did overestimate his capabilities, but we also have to say everyone around him did overestimate his abilities to run a second successful campaign. I've always been a defender of his decision to run a second campaign, because I felt if you are able to run this administration on a day-to-day basis and you are able to make the most important decisions for your country, and everyone around you is confident in your abilities to do so, then you should be able to run a second campaign and become president again, or continue to be president. And so I was really surprised seeing him fall apart in the debate against Donald Trump.
Well, to support what you just said, he did beat Donald Trump. He's the one who demonstrated that it was possible. So yet another good reason. But as you say, we probably may not know what exactly it's been. You don't mention, you mention amour propre, and you don't mention the fact of how much you come to like power when you have it, way beyond amour propre. Just the feeling, the prestige, all of the fringe benefits that come with power.
Absolutely. And that might also be a reason why Donald Trump returned. I would like to shift gears and look a bit ahead, and also compare and contrast what is going on across the Atlantic with what we've seen in Europe in, well, not similar circumstances, but many have tried to compare the two cases. So both of us were not truly surprised by Donald Trump's re-election. Many people reacted with shock and fear. Fear that a re-election of Donald Trump would mean the end of American democracy, or at least a weakening for democracy or democratic backsliding. And there are some who say that there's a risk of Donald J. Trump turning into an American Viktor Orban. So you have personally spent a lot of time in Hungary. You taught at the German-speaking Andrássy University in Budapest. Do you see any parallels between these two cases?
Oh, that's a good one. I think if you look at personalities, first of all, it's difficult. Viktor Orban is, I would say, an homme politique. That's a political creature. I don't think that Donald Trump is a political creature to begin with. You know much, much more about Donald Trump and, his political instincts. Yes, he does have those instincts, but is he a political man? Viktor Orban is. He clearly is. And, with Orban won, so to speak, that is the late 1990s and the early 2000s, a very liberal speaking and liberal acting prime minister in Hungary. It's nothing to do with Orban II as we see him, or as we have seen him over the past, 12, 15 years. So that's to begin with. In terms of personality, no, il n'y a pas photo. You can't really compare the two. Now, if you look at the, let's say, intentions or what they are trying to do with the political system, there I think you could see parallels if you want to. And what are the parallels? Well, we're coming to the core of liberal democracy. Those systems are designed to deal with people who try to extend powers. The very premise or basic assumption of building those checks and balances is precisely that you expect for people to try to gain more power. That is the very wonderful, wonderful sentence by Montesquieu. Il faut que par la disposition des choses, le pouvoir arrête le pouvoir. So you consciously design these political systems in liberal democracies so as to stop those who try to gain or get more power. So yes, Donald Trump is trying to push. Viktor Orban has been successfully pushing. And the question then is not so much, are they trying? That's a given. That's the very presumption that men strive or want power. But the question is then, how resilient are these systems of checks and balances? And when it comes to let's say, that question, you've got much, much more ingrained experience in a US-American system that's been there for 35 years. And it's been much more fragile in Hungary because you haven't, 200 years behind you. So Viktor Orban has been quite successful. And I wonder whether Donald Trump will ever be as successful as Viktor Orban. And a priori, I think it's going to be much more difficult for Donald Trump to get what he wants. Why? Well, because the system itself is just so wonderfully resilient. But, Claudia, you are the one to tell me about all the various, safety mechanisms in the American political system. But let me end by saying, looking at the big picture, how much applause, or how much do I want to commend the Hamiltons, Madisons, Jays, Thomas Jeffersons, Benjamin Franklins, all of the founding fathers. It's been 240 years, and this is still a political system that's standing. If, under strain, under stress today, Donald Trump is maybe a real test. But to begin with, wow, what a wonderful machine to break and bind power. It's been working for so long.
Absolutely. As Franklin said, it's a republic if you can keep it, regarding the results of the Constitutional Convention, and they've kept it. I really liked your observation that Donald Trump is not an homme politique, that he is not a political man. And I think that's something that took me a while to comprehend and really see. But I think once we get that, and once we understand that ideology does not matter to him, that political ideas are not of relevance to him, it's much easier to at least deal with the decision he makes and better understand that they come mainly out of many use the word transactional logic. I think that's a very, very prejudiced way of calling them, but it's an interest-driven logic at the end of the day. And you're right, I don't know much about Hungary, but from what I've read and seen from the Hungarian government, this is an ideological government. It does have core ideas that it wants to put into action and that it has used to rebuild the state to an extent. You've mentioned the resilience of American institutions, and you've mentioned how its many institutions work counter ambition. You quoted Montesquieu. I'll add the Federalist Papers where it says ambition must counteract ambition, and this is how the system has designed. But some say that under current circumstances and with a better prepared Trump, this will come under much more strain. Whereas others argue that actually this constant fear of tyranny, some scholars call it the tyrannophobia, that is running as a threat through American constitutional history, is actually more detrimental than tyranny itself, or the risk of tyranny itself actually is. How do you view this discourse about the fears of a democratic demise? Do you think these are fruitful discussions to be had, or do you think they are actually harmful because they make people afraid of the future?
Perhaps both is true to some extent. I think that we need to be vigilant, or, given, or on the basis of what I see, I think, Claudia, we do have reason to at least, keep our eyes wide open and to really watch what the man is doing. If just first of all, look at what he says. First of all, look at what he keeps telling us. Now, yes, it's Donald Trump, and we all have internalized that he does say many things within those 24 hours of that proverbial day. But, what is he telling us and what is he doing? And that, quite frankly, is enough to give me not the creeps, but to really make me worry sometimes. So the fear, I think, is, or the concern is justified. Fear and anxiety are never very good advisors, as we say in German. So that brings me to the other side. Is it helpful to engage and cultivate anxiety as so many people have been doing ever since the election? No, I think that's not helpful at all, because it can also really turn us into creatures that are fearful and that are smelling conspiracy and whatnot, rather than just going forward and living by and with the institutions that we have, and see how it's going to develop. Will these senators grow backbone? Will they grow spines, or is it actually a reality that we're going to see like this machine that many people talk of, whereby the Republicans are not going to be a check on or upon Donald Trump's ambitions? So I don't quite know, and I'm free to admit that I don't know. But I think we have reasons to be concerned, given the things that he says, that he keeps telling us, but also given the things that he seems to be doing, the nominations, the announcements. But yes, Claudia, we all know that the guy has made many announcements that much of what he's telling us is basically about, leverage, about bargaining, about negotiations. When I look at Canada and Mexico now, I mean, come on, he's not going to put a 25% tax on guacamole a few days prior to the Super Bowl. He's certainly not going to do that, but he's using those things. That's Donald Trump. So to some extent, I'm utterly and completely with those who say, let's just wait and see how things are going to develop.
Absolutely. And I do agree. The way he talks and the way he uses threats very openly, it is and has been detrimental to political culture in the United States, and thus it's detrimental to American democracy, and no doubt about it. But I think we should give the institutions more credit for how resilient they have been during his first administration, where we have seen that even with plans that at first glance should have been popular with at the beginning, Republican majority, namely getting rid of the Affordable Care Act or revamping the Affordable Care Act. He was not able to push through because at the end of the day, even very Trumpist or very populist representatives and senators had, at the end of the day, been more faithful to their constituents and their own prospects of getting re-elected than Donald Trump. And I think this will go into play again in this administration, because Donald Trump will serve only one term, but these gentlemen and ladies in the House of Representatives and the Senate, they want to get re-elected more than once. And so they will be a lot more faithful to what they've promised their constituents, what their constituents express their interests to be. And they will also look ahead as to what is coming or who is coming after Donald Trump. And the Supreme Court, even though it has gotten a bad rep during the Trump administration and in recent years, it has been a lot more, shall we say, of a veto player than many give it credit for either. We might not like the results that it has yielded. We might not like all of the decisions that have come from the Supreme Court, but they have been sticking to a fairly consistent interpretation of the Constitution, meaning they do respect the Constitution. In contrast to Donald Trump, who's definitely not a constitutionalist.
Yeah, that's a very wonderful way of putting it. He may not be a constitutionalist. He may be the Donald, and he will, given that he is what he is, he will keep pushing. So, with him pushing on the other side, we need to be basically playing by the rules and making sure that he will have to play by the rules.
I think what gets underestimated is how many veto players outside of federal government are actually also very vigilant. So I'm speaking of the states themselves. Even though there have been studies that there is democratic backsliding in several U.S. states, they have become very combative against federal government. They are following their own route when it comes to, for instance, environmental legislation. They have developed at times even their own foreign policy, and they have started litigating the federal government at unprecedented levels. So we can be prepared for both cities as well as states gearing up if they are not satisfied with the direction that the federal government is taking. And we also have one of the strongest media landscapes in the world, probably in the United States, even though the ratings in terms of free press ratings, etc., are sometimes a bit shaky. But we have an extremely diverse and an extremely vigilant media landscape that is taking everything apart that is happening.
True. And yet, perhaps right there, looking at the Öffentlichkeit in German, the public sphere and the discourse taking place in that public sphere, there I cannot help feeling somewhat uneasy about what I have seen during the campaign. If you look at Elon Musk using X or turning Twitter into something utterly and completely different from what Twitter used to be, if I listen to what Elon Musk keeps posting, if we keep listening to Donald Trump, you cannot help feeling that the quality of distortion or the quality of misinformation, the quality of the lies. I mean, campaigns are never really about truths, right? But the sheer dimension of systematic misinformation, I think, should have us worry, even though, and I'm fully with you, if there is a strong media doing the let's say the transparency business for us, but even in the United States, those gatekeepers tend to or are, as far as I'm concerned, weaker than they used to be because we have fragmentation in public discourse. The New York Times and the Washington Post, may still have some audience, but they don't reach the entire political elite any longer. So what I'm saying is, again, let's be vigilant, yes, and let's hope that the function or one of the functions of this landscape, all these media, that they will keep doing what they're doing, and that we don't have more of a, let's say, a reduction or that we don't see more damage in that sphere, because I think damage there has been.
Well, there's no denying that legacy media like the New York Times and Washington Post have taken a hit, although one has to add that during the first Trump administration, they got more subscribers than before, because people suddenly realized they needed a more reliable source. But one has to add that they have also been weakened to an extent to their own fault. I have to say that the Washington Post and the New York Times that I'm reading daily have gotten too much into the Democratic camp and have not been able to keep a sober distance. So a lot of what one can rightly call fear-mongering with regards to fascist tendencies, etc., that they are alleging are existent in the Trump campaign, that hasn't been really credible to many people and has certainly not added to their positioning. But I think we are neglecting that the media landscape has become a lot more diverse in terms of the players that there are out there, who are also acting as fact checkers, who are discussing contexts, etc., and who are adding new layers of reporting to what is going on. So even though I agree that there is less consistency and there isn't something like a public consensus as to whom to listen to, as there was in the good old days of Walter Cronkite, where everyone had this one trusted voice, there is still so much going on and there is so much investigative force out there that I do trust that this particular veto player will remain important and will remain a strong voice and a strong lens on what is going on.
I'm glad to hear it. I'm really glad to hear it, because that's really been one sphere where I felt uneasy in September, October, just listening and reading what, for example, Elon Musk would put on or would post on X. That's just, it's going a bit far.
Well, Elon Musk is a case of his own. Maybe we'll do another podcast about him specifically. And the allure of the big tech guys to a leader like Donald Trump. But maybe I share with you a moment in the campaign that gave me hope for the future of American discourse. And that was the campaign between the two vice presidential candidates, because it was like a blast from the past. It was respectful. It was well-mannered. They said several times to each other that they actually agreed. J.D. Vance suggested that if they lost the election, he would pray for the other side and wish them well. And Tim Walz, who had called J.D. Vance before that weird, has also been very nice and civil. And I felt like, well, this is the past in a way, but it might be the future again, because Americans might not reward the loudness and shrillness and the divisiveness for that much longer.
Again, reason for hope.
And I mean, hasn't one past president told us that there's hope we can believe in?
Absolutely. And another one, and this is just something that I came across a few days ago, Thomas Jefferson reminding us with this distant mirror that the only safe repository for power remains the people. And that is so very much an American thing to say. And a beautiful thing to say, of course. If you believe in democracy as the least dangerous, the least, tempted kind of political system that we have still.
The last and best repository for political power, the people. I think that's what the citizens of this sister republic can also agree to. And I think that's a wonderful way to conclude our conversation. But I don't want to let you go just of yet, because it's Christmas time. People might have more time on their hands to read over the closing of the year. So, Christoph, what should our listeners read, watch, or listen to next to make sense of the current American moment? What's your recommendation?
In the good old days, I would probably have come up with some book. Being more realistic, I think that people don't like reading during Christmas, but they may like watching. And that's, of course, another prejudice on my part. But one thing that I've seen, and I'm talking about film, it's called The Apprentice. And I came across it, Claudia. You're laughing, but I came across that movie, I think, like 5 or 6 weeks ago. And we watched it along with students, together with students, Ali Abazi, and the screenplay written by Gabriel Sherman, and a wonderful way of making you understand, or better understand, how Donald Trump actually ticks. It's a lot about Roy Cohn, one of those lawyers, a real, a kind of a dangerous kind of person. But The Apprentice really helped me in appreciating more let's say, the early years of Donald Trump, and the formative years of Donald Trump as a upcoming real estate tycoon, so to speak. Well, not tycoon, but a real estate person in New York. And the advice that Roy Cohn would give him, never back down. You never want to apologize. Keep attacking. This kind of stuff really is, or provides us with some perspective that helps to understand Donald Trump as we go forward. So watch the movie if you get a chance.
The Apprentice. Interesting Christmas movie choice, but we support that. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, Christoph. Will you come again?
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Thank you for having me, Claudia.
Thank you so much. And that was it from Grüezi Amerika. We look forward to having you as our listeners again. And with that, auf Wiederhören.
Grüezi Amerika. Views from the Sister Republic, a University of St. Gallen podcast by Claudia Brühwiler.